Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've said this before at past hearings, but it merits repeating once again today. Our nation has made a commitment that our most significant historic, cultural, and natural sites should be preserved in perpetuity for future generations of Americans. They help to tell the story of who we are as a people and a country. The four bills before us today related to our national military parks, the historically black colleges and universities, the Historic Preservation Fund, and the Historic Preservation Fund itself all play important roles in achieving this goal. Of the four bills on our agenda, two of them will expand the boundaries at national military parks that protect Civil War battlefields. These bills demonstrate that the National Park Service continues to work collaboratively with state and private partners to ensure that this history is appropriately preserved and provide the National Park Service and their local partners the necessary authority to continue this work. H.R. 295, introduced by Representative Clyburn, reauthorizes a grant program that provides historically black colleges and universities with funds to restore and rehabilitate nationally significant historic structures. The fund was originally created in recognition that many historically black colleges and universities have critical rehabilitation needs, but lack the resources to complete such projects. Grants awarded through the fund must be matched at a ratio of 70% federal funds to 30% non-federal funds. To date, 59 institutions in 20 different states have benefited from the program, but Congress has failed to provide any funding since 2012. Not only should our committee pass Mr. Clyburn's legislation, but we should encourage our colleagues on the Appropriations Committee to restart funding for the program. Finally, I look forward to hearing from our colleagues Mr. Blumenauer and Mr. Turner on the importance of reauthorizing the Historic Preservation Fund, which lapsed last September. This fund was created by Congress in 1976 and serves as a primary source of funding for state and tribal historic preservation offices. These offices are responsible for identifying our country's most historic places, assisting local governments in their ongoing preservation efforts, and ensuring that federal projects have a minimal impact on historic resources. By using revenues from offshore oil and gas leases, the Historic Preservation Fund does not cost a dime to American taxpayers and does not contribute to the federal deficit. H.R. 2817 reauthorizes this fund for an additional 10 years at the current level of $150 million. I am a strong supporter of reauthorizing this fund because I have seen firsthand the role that historic preservation can play in protecting our history, spurring sustainable growth, and maintaining our quality of life. My hometown of Lowell, Massachusetts is a national model for how historic preservation can go hand in hand with economic revitalization. Lowell National Historical Park was the first urban national park of its kind and was created around the idea that the stories and places that shaped our nation's industrial history are not only worth preserving, but can be a catalyst for bringing in new businesses and residents to a downtown area. In fact, the Lowell National Historical Park cooperates with a local nonprofit corporation to run its own small historic preservation loan fund, which has helped fund the redevelopment of 22 nationally significant historic buildings and generated over $122 million in private investments. That's a 162 to 1 ratio of private investment to each federal dollar that was originally appropriated back in the early 1980s. None of the work in Lowell or anywhere across Massachusetts would be possible without strong public-private partnerships and a variety of tools, including federal assistance through the Historic Preservation Fund. I look forward to our discussion on this legislation and hope that it will be quickly scheduled for a markup by the full committee. Thank you. With that, I yield back. I don't have any questions except to say it was my honor to welcome Congressman Turner to Lowell and to Concord, Massachusetts, to showcase the investments that have been made there in historic preservation, our Revolutionary War history, and our industrial history. I would certainly invite Congresswoman Blackburn and Congressman Clyburn to come as well, because as we all know, we're inspired by these histories that are so much a part of who we are, and it was my honor to visit Dayton and see the outcome of those investments that have been made there. What we do see in all of this is what what is possible with federal investment, that absent that investment, these efforts become that much more challenging. And I think all of your legislation that you've spoken about today recognize the important partnership role that the federal government has to play in preserving our history, our culture, and our beautiful natural sites. So I look forward to seeing this legislation move through the committee and make its way to the floor. And thank you all for the ways in which you seek to protect the history of your districts. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We know we're all here today, and I appreciate, first of all, before I begin with my questions, I appreciated, Mr. Gilmore, when you referenced the efforts to protect the important landscapes of the Civil War that once lost forever. And I think that's the challenge all of you wrestle with as you seek to protect these great historic resources that are all across our country. And I appreciate your commitment to those protections for future generations. And as we know, the Historic Preservation Fund has played an important role in that effort. It lapsed last year. That's what brings us here. So Ms. Hughes and Dr. Toothman, I would like to ask you, how has that lapse impacted state and tribal historic preservation offices, their ability to meet the goals that have been outlined by Congress in the Historic Preservation Act? Ms. Hughes, we'll start with you.
You know, the funding is very important to us, certainly, but reauthorization really shows us that Congress is looking at the program and you support the work that we do. It provides us with some certainty that there is that support, and that helps us as we are carrying out our activities, having that certainty and the recognition that you're in support of the activities that are being funded through this program.
And Dr. Toothman?
I would second what Ms. Hughes said, is that we think that having the reauthorization sends a strong signal to all of those who are committed to preserving our shared heritage, that Congress is continuing to support facilitating that through the partnership supported by HPF.
Thank you. And Ms. Hughes, can you talk about the importance of his state historic preservation plans, what role they play?
Well, from my perspective, they're very important because it's that opportunity, although it occurs every 5 years, it's a very rigorous outreach to local communities, local governments, neighborhoods, about what's important to them in their state, in their neighborhoods. What are the preservation issues? We just completed our preservation plan, and looking regionally in Maryland as an example, there are varying issues and concerns from the people that then guide us in how we spend our money. On the eastern shore of Maryland, where I grew up, a lot of issues with repetitive flooding, eroding of archaeological sites, impacts on historic districts that are waterfront historic districts. In Baltimore City, issues, concerns about demolition and large tracts of housing which are vacant and blighted, and how are we going to handle that? In southern Maryland, changes in the agricultural economy, and so the tobacco landscape that was once there, really, we're not growing tobacco anymore. What's going to happen to those tobacco barns? And that speaks so much to the identity of the people from that area. So in that way, we're able to touch base and then redirect our efforts and how we're spending our money to be most responsive to local needs and concerns.
And it certainly highlights the diversity of effort that you have to undertake, the various ways in which different parts of a state or whatever wrestle with preserving their history, but it's very unique to those places. So the plan certainly does help to set that out. Public-private partnerships has certainly been a very important role in Lowell, Massachusetts, where I'm from. We promote it all the time. We've seen that government alone cannot do it, that the public sector always has a role to play, and they've made tremendous contributions in historic preservation efforts in my district. I'm curious as to if you could talk about how state historic preservation offices work with private partners to help leverage the federal investment through the fund, knowing that the federal government does not want to do it by themselves.
The activities that are supported at the SHPO level through the HPF are really foundational in terms of providing citizens with accesses to financial assistance tools and other types of tools to encourage redevelopment and revitalization. So the National Register program is one example where, by working with local communities who wish to pursue those sorts of designations, that then opens up the door to federal rehabilitation tax credits, as well as in many cases state tax credits and loans and grant programs that can help them really find ways for private investment to go into their communities. Again, in my state of Maryland, I see this type of tool used in small communities like Cambridge on the Eastern Shore, 12,000 people, seafood packing history there. We're working with an applicant who wants to return a hardware store that's really been abandoned and is about to collapse to turn it into affordable housing and also retail. Also large-scale mill buildings, private investment in the Mount Vernon Mill, $38 million tax credit project that brought private investment into an area that really had been vacant and underutilized, and it's housing for teachers and others, as well as retail and restaurant businesses.
Thank you. I yield back, but the tax credit program, I have seen over and over again the evidence of what it can do.